you think it will get to a point where, after playing so many games or being asked to play so many games, that the players will say, I don't want to be part of this, and they'll actually end up like going on strike?
Yeah, I think we're close to that.
The risk of injury is massive, so yeah, we are not robots.
To be honest, I totally agree with them. I think it's also like a big topic at the moment in dressing rooms.
More. Every season, the sponsors, the media outlets and the football clubs want football players to play more matches to generate more revenue through ticket sales, advertising, subscriptions and so on. Burnt out from travel and the lack of physical and mental recovery time between matches, football players are threatening to take industrial and legal action. This situation has not developed simply because of greed, but out of the natural development of capitalism. As production becomes more automated, the general rate of profit tends to fall since, in short, the faster commodities are made, the more they are devalued. Capitalists therefore have to offset falling profit rates by finding more and more ways to funnel more revenue into their companies and bank accounts. For the same reason, capitalists are compelled to monopolise and corner markets. Football is no exception. Like Britain in general, English clubs are no longer owned by numerous private shareholders, but by sole US oligarchs. While the vast majority of clubs fall further and further behind, a smaller and smaller band of rich clubs dominate the football pyramid thanks to disproportionate shares of TV money, sponsorship and merchandise income. Manchester City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich and Paris Saint-Germain have largely destroyed competition in England, Spain, Germany and France respectively. Madrid have won 6 of the last 11 European Champions League tournaments. These clubs and a few others threaten to form a breakaway European Super League in order to further centralise football's profits, strengthening their hand in winning concessions from the existing competitions. These clubs hoard the best players, but only they can afford their transfer fees and wages. As the demand for world-class footballers rises, the supply in relative terms actually tends to fall, as the richest clubs can only fit so many players into their teams and squads, pushing up transfer fees and wages. The same dynamic exists in capitalist industry in general. The tech industry suffers from a severe shortage of software engineers, for example, because amid falling profit rates and increasing bankruptcies, capitalist enterprise and thus the capitalist state cannot afford to train the required number, pushing down the supply relative to the demand and therefore the cost of skilled labour up. A vicious cycle that incentivises further investment in innovation and cheaper automation, but which also demands higher qualified and more expensive labour to make such innovations. Class struggle over the distribution of profit and money ensues, as skilled workers demand higher wages to match the rising value of their labour power. This dynamic has tended to make the top football players increasingly powerful, a recent example of the rising power of the working class historically, setting the stage for the working class having already ascended from slavery and serfdom to become the next ruling class in a publicly owned communist economy as a result of the capitalist losing his capacity to pay his wage slave. This trend has contributed to a slow decline in autocratic style football managers.
All this tippy-tappy stuff everybody keeps going about the right way to play football is all a lot sometimes.
Replaced by more cerebral personalities who give players more autonomy to express their talents on the field. Like industry, well-rehearsed tactics are increasingly described as automatisms, and players as technical for the fine-tuned skills they possess and the intelligence of their decision-making, their mental labour becoming at least as important as their physical labour. They are more rounded, using their brains as much as their feet and no longer trained to play as they grow up with a fixed set of skills for a fixed position, but so that they can play in many or even hybrid positions. Goalkeepers are now expected to be able to pass the ball as well as any outfield player and take up the position of a central defender. These developments are trickling down to the lower levels of the game, and even Sunday League teams can film their matches with automated cameras that provide some data analysis. Of course though, the amount of time most players can afford to invest in their training is very low, and the costs of running a club is increasingly unsustainably high. The lower levels of the game are saturated with players relative to the number of clubs. Professional footballers at the top end of the game are multi-millionaires. They are unproductive in the sense that they do not make commodities, but that is now the case for most workers who service rather than produce capital. Rich footballers are semi-proletarians, dependent on a wage, but having earned enough to supplement it with investments in property and business. They are involved in a class struggle nonetheless, and capitalism's tendency towards crisis and monopoly gives fewer and fewer players such privilege and threatens all of them with full re-proletarianisation. If footballers win their demands to play fewer matches, capital accumulation suffers. Their bosses will have to look for other ways to offset the negative effects on the bottom line. High transfer fees and wages have already contributed to clubs signing players at very young ages and ramping up investment in the women's game. As with the rest of capitalism, all this is unsustainable. Footballers will, like other workers, have to come to the realisation that they must take full control of their lives by banding together to take the economy under public ownership. For football, this will mean that clubs and the game in general are democratically run by players and fans, no longer subjected to the dictates of a small number of private owners. Running a club will become increasingly affordable, giving rise to new clubs and reintroducing competition to the sport that we still like to call the people's game.